Hello, everybody. It's Mikey OCD Hi-Fi Guy, and I am going to go over active crossovers and multiple amplifiers, how you biamp or triamp, and what's all this hullabaloo about active and passive, and what does it all mean, and why do you even give a crap? So I'm going to hopefully explain this in some easy to understand language and my handy dandy pad here and pencil, and I'll carry on. So what we're talking about here is dividing the frequency up in a speaker. Okay, so you have a loudspeaker. You've got three different, presumably, okay, there's can be all sorts. There can be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it. But for the example here, I'm going to use a three-way speaker. Okay, that's what this is. Now, a three-way speaker traditionally will mean a low, a mid, and a high. Okay, and these are, we're talking about frequency frequency. So we'll take the simple span of frequency response, 20 to 20K, which is supposed to be what the range of human hearing. I can't hear anywhere close to that high. And 20 hertz sounds like a helicopter landing. I mean, it's not a tone. It's like you're getting chopped. When people say, oh, is it flat down to 20? You hear people say that. Is it flat down to 20? And it's like, what material? I guess in home theater, sure, they have stuff that's down there, but music, there's nothing really at 20. Rarely. Anyway, just keep that in mind. Okay. Food for thought. So what we're talking about is normally, okay, we've got this frequency range, 20 to 20 presumably, in our source material, the music, okay? It spans from here on the low end to here on the high end. And, okay, and normally the way we do it is we've got our source, which is a streamer, a CD player, a server. That's the source. That's where the music comes from. It comes digitally down to the DAC, and then the DAC does the conversion. And then normally your DAC goes straight down to usually you go to like a stereo amp. So that's what this represents. And then you would go left and right to your speakers with the speaker cables. Okay, all the amp does is just make it louder. If it's a power amp, it makes everything louder. It goes to 11, hopefully. And so when we come over to the speaker, you never see the crossover because most of the time they're inside the cabinet. So you'll see two little bolts on the back or two little posts or maybe four for biamping, and those are the inputs to the speaker. Now on the other side of those posts, they go down to a little circuit board. Could be big circuit board, could be 3 circuit boards. But basically the idea is you come in there with your 20 to 20, you come into this, and then you push 20 to 20 through this passive. Okay, and it filters and bleeds it out and moves some this way and forces others that way and pulls other, it divides up the frequency so you get low, mid, and high going to each respective driver. Okay, now this whole method of doing it, it's rather archaic. It's riddled with issues, with phase response, with time delay, there's just group delay. There's so many different things that come into play that it's got a bunch of problems. Okay, and these are really, if you look at it mathematically, if you really research, it's like this is a bad way to do it. Okay, it's very convenient because it's easy for us to put 2 speaker leads on there and just put it to a stereo amp and power it up and off we go. But it is the most prone to loss. This is the most lossy way that we can do this whole thing. Okay, so what we do is we shove full range through here. It bleeds off and filters different things, and it only lets the lows reach here. It only lets the mids reach here, and it only lets the highs reach up to the top. That's basically what you do. You're cutting out stuff that goes to each different respective driver. You're holding it back, or you're moving it somewhere else. Okay, so traditionally the crossover can get warm and hot because things are just inefficient. They're turning to heat instead of turning into sound, and it is a lossy situation. Okay, what we do when we say active crossover is we do the same thing. We've got the source. We go down to the DAC. Okay, it does the conversion. now the DAC goes over, and this can be done. This is presuming it's an analog DAC. Okay, that's the way. I mean, an analog crossover. This is the way I like to do things. There is another way in which you would put a digital crossover. That's where people talk about DSP. That would go in the chain, and it would be a little bit different. But I'll just explain it this way for the way for ease of how I do things. Okay, just so you understand it. So you go from the DAC, you go out of the DAC, now left and right analog, you go to the crossover in here, left and right, and then what this does is this crossover splits out low, medium, or mids and highs, okay? So that all that's coming out of these, now these are 2 connectors, right, off each one. So you've got your left and your right. So low, mids, and highs, left and right. Now, what this means is, okay, so this only lets out, you're doing the division, or I guess, or the separation of the frequency response in the upstream, okay? So which means you go straight from here to the amplifier. Now, the amplifier is simply going to amplify, let's say 20, okay, I did it over here. This gives us an idea. Okay, so 20 on the low end. For the lows, we're maybe, and this is just generalizing, 20 to 300 hertz. Okay, that's what's going to be the bass driver. The mid is going to be 300 to roughly 3,000, okay, hertz. And then from 3,000 up is going to be all tweeter, okay, and then it'll naturally roll off. You don't usually have to put anything up top. So what you do here is, and in this example where we use the passive, this means the amp amplifies 20 to 20K, sends 20 to 20K down to the passive crossover. If you bi-amp and utilizing the passive, then both amps are going to, even though, okay, so this one, let's say this amp is for, in a bi-amp situation, you've got 4 posts on the back of your speaker. 2 of them are for the highs, 2 of them are for the lows. That's just presumably speaking, that's 90% of the way it is. So this, your say your low amp when you're bi-amping, and then you've got your high amp going to these posts, okay? Now, the signal coming in to both of them is identical. It's both 20 to 20. You're coming out of here full range on both of these amps, even though this thing only needs to do the job for the highs, and this only needs to do the job for the lows. You're making it do the job for both, and then you're bleeding it off down here or splitting it apart down here in the passive. This is the easiest way to see how wasteful and how lossy and inefficient a passive is when you're using 2 amps and trying to do it through the bi-wire binding posts, is they're both amplifying 20 to 20 even though they don't need 20 to 20, because this guy is only going to amplify 20 to 300. This one's going to amplify from 300 up, because we're just doing 2. If we did 3 of them, then that would be 300 to 3,000, and then this one would be 3,000 and up. Okay, so you can imagine there. It just, I mean, just from the sound of this situation, it doesn't sound right. Now, if you come up to the active, what we do is we come out of the DAC, left and right. This splits it into low, mid, and high. So we have right here, we've got the 20 to 300. Right here, we've got the 300 to 3,000. Right here, we've got the 3,000 and up for the tweeter. Okay, now it comes out of here, and you just go to one of the amps, okay, stereo amp, and you go. And this is getting all that's getting, because it's already been split, it's already been divvied up. So the only thing this amp is seeing is 3,000 and up. It's not seeing any of the bass frequencies at all. So the job of this one, that's the best job in the house. That's the easiest job he's got out of these 3. Okay, then we take the mids, we come down to here, and this one is only getting 300 to 3,000 hertz. Its prime operating spot, because that's all it needs to do to run the mid, is 300 to 3,000. So it's doing its perfect little job amplifying just the mid frequencies. And then you come down to the bottom one, and this guy gets the heavy lifting. He gets the 20 to 300, and he's the workhorse. He's the little grunty pig, making sure that he holds the current steady and keeps those long bass notes going for you. So but it doesn't have to bother with any of the highs or the mids or anything like that. So what you get in this situation is you get a very efficient system whereby each amp is only amplifying what's proper for its own driver. This is for the tweeter, this one's for the mid, this one's for the low. So all it's doing is only the job that it needs to for this span. and so forth. It's much more efficient, obviously, with 3 amps instead of 1. You're getting much more control and much greater power output from the speakers. You're going to realize higher SPL at lower volume setting on the DAC or the pre if you have a pre in there. Just so that you know, okay, so if we had a preamp, the preamp would be right here. So we'd go DAC into the pre, and then the pre would go over to the crossover. So we would still control volume with the preamp. PRE. Okay, so and this is how that is set up. This gives you an idea. Now, there are different ways you could do this. And there's you could have this. Let's say this is this is the Virastar. This shows the Virastar amp. That's how our faceplate looks. And it's a 6-channel amp because it has 3 stereo boards in there on top of one another. And so you can run it as 6 channels. In which case you can do low, mid, and high, low, mid, high, and low, mid, high. This could be a triamp amplifier doing a stereo job where you've got low, mid, and high on each side, or you can bridge it so that it's got 3 channels that are doing double the power, and then you could go low, mid, and high for one side, and then put another one over here and go low, mid, and high for that side. Or you could do what I do, which is the tweakiest way to do it, is 6 monoblocks. So you've got 1 monoblock for this driver, 1 monoblock for that driver, 1 monoblock for that driver, and so forth on the right channel. You've got 6, okay, and they're all in mono operational mode, okay? Then, and the reason I do this is because it gives you better stereo separation. You're not sharing left and right in a single chassis on a single power supply. You've got a dedicated left and dedicated right. They're isolated from one another, so there is not the same crosstalk that you get when you run them as a stereo amp by splitting them. So so this is how I do it. And we'll be set up, and not only do I do monoblocks, but I do quad amp. So I've got a 4th one up here and a 4th one here. So I have 8 monoblocks. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's sub, low, mid, high, and sub, low, mid, high. Now the way you'll see in my rig, I don't have 4 monoblocks per side because with some of the, like the Jeff Roland amp, it's so powerful, the 625S2, I use a stereo amp on bottom. So I do sub, and then this one is for low, and then the one above it is the AGD Vivace. Well, let's see. No, there's one in the middle. Oh, yeah, the tube amp, the Nat Audio. This is for mid, so we've got sub, and then we've got low, and then we've got mid right here. That's a monoblock tube amp. And then up top is the AGD Vivace, which is a single mono for the tweeters, or highs. Okay, so this is where you'll see people putting different types of circuits or different types of amplifiers in for different duty. So like on the bottom for the low, you may just say, well, I'm going to put a Class D, or I'm going to put a Pro amp. You know, I'm going to go buy a Crown that's got 2,000 watts, and I'll put that down low because nuance doesn't matter for the sub. So I'll buy some nuance, some amp that's just a you know, brute force and 0 nuance, and you can buy them relatively inexpensive, and they've got a ton of power, and so you use that on the low perhaps, or on the sub. And then as you start to get up on the precious mids, I use in this situation, which you'll see soon, is a vacuum tube. So I've got a vacuum tube here. I'm not going to even try and draw one. Well, sure, why not? That weird one that I have, it's a gnat, so it's got 2 arms coming out. It's weird. Anyways, you'll see it in a second. So the mids, the mids I leave to the tubes because the tubes are so good in the mids, and we'll see how it turns out. And then the highs for the AGD Vivace, which has got the most clean, clear top end of any amplifier I've heard. So I use it for the tweeter, and it's just brilliant up there. Now, this being said, when you're doing things like this with the separate amps, you want to make sure that they are similar to same gain output on each of these amps. If they're not, the one's going to be louder and push harder, and so you'll get more. Say this one's on the sub. This is, say, 32 dB of gain, and then this is 26 is common. Okay, dB of gain for the woofer. My sub is going to be overpowering this big time. And unless I have a gain knob on the front here, I can't control that. But what you can do is when this is being actively crossed over is there is gain control in the crossover. So whatever one's coming down to the for the sub, I just turn the gain down there. But honestly, I like to do no adjustments. I'd like to match the gain better than I would like to adjust for gain. I'd rather just have them naturally be the same gain, as I think it's more efficient. I don't like having to cut and definitely not boost. Like I do not want to boost a thing. I usually only cut and I'd rather not if I don't have to. So this is what the whole thing is about. Now, when you take a rig and you put, and it's a good, I'm talking about a good rig, something that really can realize the potential that what I'm explaining. If you do this with a receiver or something and some speakers that you bought for $500 that are three ways, you're not going to get the result that I'm talking about. It could be cool, it could be different, but I don't know that you'd need to go to this length with something like that. This is a little more, this is more expensive, clearly, because it's more amplifiers, it's all that many more cables, it's more of a cable routing nightmare, and all that kind of stuff. But when you do something like this with a high-end rig, the difference is utterly stunning. I mean, it's not even funny, the change that occurs. I couldn't believe it when I did it. So much that I'm not going back at this point. I'm sure after several years of turning on this many amps and doing all this crap in between, I'm probably get sick of it and I'll be looking for something much simpler. Now, that being said, okay, you hear about, and I've got this little guy tucked down here over on this side, if you can see lower left. This is a single driver speaker, okay? There is something beautiful and pristine and lovely out there called a single driver full range speaker, okay? Or loudspeaker, or driver is the thing, the actual piece itself. And many of them are dual concentric, which means they have the tweeter and the woofer together with the tweeter in the middle, and they work independently. And a lot of them have zero crossover. So all you do is you hook up your amp there, and this is where the tube amps really come into play, because especially the small watt single-ended triode tubes, okay? This area with the, let's see if I can draw this, probably not, but with the 300B, okay, which is what I'm trying to draw here, 300B, okay, this is like, and then the 2A3, the 45 triode, the 101, there's on and on, but these are the main single-ended triodes that you see. They have, well, the 300B has 8 watts output max, okay? 2A3 is even less. I think it's like 3 or 4 watts. 45 I think is about the same. Now, they each have different characteristics, okay? 45 is like the imaging queen, if I'm doing this correctly. It's known for having just the best imaging of any of them. And then 2A3 is like, I can't remember what its forte is. It has something that it's like the sweetest, or like the most, I think it's like the sweetest sound, 300B is also a seductive sound. It's much more powerful than these. It's only 4 watts more, but it's just an incredible amount. When you're at this kind of wattage and you double it to 8, it's like having a turbo, and then this is like just a little bicycle or something. But these tubes, just incredible nuance, like the nuance and subtle detail and the subtle differences between them. This is the fine wine area, okay, of hi-fi. This is the fine wine, total connoisseur. Guys, you're not gonna be, you're not overdoing anything. You're not showing, it's like the guys up here are like the Ferrari dudes, right? We're racing around, brah, brah, look at me, check this out, I've got a big old extravagant fucking V12, whatever, and down here it's like, oh, I've got a refined Perrigo, fucking whatever, excuse me, didn't mind you say that, whatever, some handcrafted, bespoke watch, created and we're having fine wine from the Burgundy region, and, all this kind of stuff, because this is nuance, baby. This is really... This is the tweakers of the tweakers of the tweakers of the hi-fi guys, is the single-ended triode dudes, the flea watt we call them, like flea, F-L-E-A, flea watt. This is a whole different sector, okay? The people in here, they talk a different language than the guys over here. Some people cross the two and are back and forth. I do. I go back and forth. I have two different rigs. I have one like this in the main rig, and then I have one like this off to the side for tubes. Mainly, most of my tubes are over on this side. But there is something absolutely magical about hearing a full range driver with no crossover and a single tube pushing it with the little driver, in there. I mean, you will be astounded. I can never, ever, ever comprehend how one driver, well, this is actually two because it's dual concentric, but there are single drivers that do not have two together. It's just a single driver, and it does all the damn frequency. And you're like, wait a second, how is it doing that? How does it vibrate back and forth at different speeds? Presumably 20 hertz, or let's take it up high, 300 hertz vibrates, that little, the cone back and forth at 300 times, 300 cycles, right? 300 times per second. They're going back. But then you've got to do 3,000 simultaneously. So you've got to, at the same time you're doing, how do you do that with one damn piece of paper? I don't get it. So that to me is totally not only perplexing and amazing, but it's very seductive sounding. It draws you in. It's hard to leave. You're so compelled by the sound. It's like, okay, but you're not really going to rock out, or you're not going to be, it does, there's some things that it does, and there's some things that they don't do. Anyways, I'm getting off onto sort of a different tangent because we were talking about this, but I wanted to talk about the single-ended tube and the single driver full range loudspeaker, because this one uses no crossover at all. And it's quite amazing how it does that. I still don't get it, and it's like seeing a huge plane take off. No matter how many times I see that C5 or whatever take off, my mind is blown. Like, how does that lumbering old ox huge thing get up in the air? I can't believe it. It's the same thing with full range drivers for me. Every time I hear it, I'm blown away. Like, oh my God, how is it doing all those frequencies at the same time? I don't get it. It's cool. And this is the whole schlemiel about active, biamp, triamp, quad amp, active crossover, active system. There's many different ways to call it, okay? But this is the highest level, pretty much the highest level of, if you're getting tweaky and you're trying to eliminate loss from a rig, this is the way you do it. You eliminate all the crap. You get rid of the passive. You don't have a passive crossover. It's all active. It's single channel or single amp per driver. And this is the cat's meow. It is totally tweaky. It is. It will take. Okay, let me explain one thing. Okay, you know how long you've been watching my videos? What is it? It's been over a year. It's been almost, okay, maybe we're going on, no, when's 2 years going to be? Well, I can't even remember. But nonetheless, there's hundreds of videos up there, right? Okay? My rig, from the time you started watching my videos, that was me starting tuning my rig. Okay? Here we are a year later. I know exactly where we're going with it. I know exactly what the next steps are. We're still tuning my rig. Okay? You guys don't know this because I guess I just never even talk about it, but and it's the same with most of us. When we get to the point where we are no longer tweaking the rig and we've got it to a point of balance and utter satisfaction with the level that it's at, we have parties, man. It's like people come over to our house and fly from different states to listen to the rig. And we hang out and we, have some beers or some food or, barbecue or whatever. And we fly around the U.S. to check out each other's rig because we're at that level. We've got it balanced and people want to come and they want to see. Let me hear what it sounds like. Let me see what your rig sounds like compared to mine, compared to the others we hear. And you find you can learn a lot. That is what this is all about. This is the most tweaky way to do it. It does not mean it's the best, okay? It means it just says something about the guy who does it, He just wants to do everything to 11. And so that's the way this is done. There is just as much elegance, if not more elegance, in something like the single-ended triode and the full-range driver. That is extremely elegant and beautiful in its simplicity. It is something else. Very compelling. This is like ego run amok. okay, where you're just going and everything's getting just honed down to the little teeny thing, and then once this is set up, then we go after vibration control, and we start putting vibration under everything and getting that all tweaked. Then we go after each little cable and making sure it routes and it doesn't cross near a power cable, and they don't touch anything, and they're up on risers, and they're not on the carpet, and they're not getting static electricity. And then we ferret out the AC power, and we make sure that the power is clean to everything, and there's dedicated circuits, and better yet, that there's a whole panel, electrical panel, just for this, and it's separate from our normal house panel. And then on each of these pieces, we will put an extra ground, not the one that's in the plug, the safety ground. I'm talking about there's a lug on back where you put a ground onto the chassis, and you ground each one individually to a star point that goes, maybe back into the closet and then out through the wall to, 6, pure silver ground rods that are hammered into the ground, whatever it is. We go crazy like that. Some guys put transformers in their yard where they like, instead of on the end of the block where there's a transformer to power everybody, they have the electrical company drop a transformer in their yard, so it makes fresh power for them and only them, their house only. That is insanity, but that sounds so cool. I just can't imagine how much that must cost. It's probably a lot. So that's what this sort of setup is. That's what you see in my rig. You're seeing a quad amp rig, and then of course I take things in and out. We want to sample this, we want to sample that, so I change its configuration. But in the basics of it, or the way it is meant to be most of the time, is it's a quad amp, actively crossed over, active rig with I've got a sub tower next to the Maggie, and I'll go through that whole design, what I did with the Maggie speakers in another time, and then I'll tell you how I just went through the Magnapan, measured the different drivers, looked at their response, decided I didn't want the mid-range on the same membrane as my woofer, so I put a separate mid-range out there. We're going to have some fun this weekend. I've got a very special guest coming by, and we will be really getting the crossover for this thing totally nailed. I've got a guy coming that is much senior, my knowledge, on this kind of thing. He's actually done it for a living. He's an engineer. He was in the military. He did all this, RF and high-level stuff. And he's going to come and stay for a couple days, and we're going to go through the rig and get the crossover points and the slopes and everything so completely dialed that I don't even have to think about it anymore. And that will be just a major happiness for me. And I'm going to learn the process, so I'll be able to hopefully teach some other people as well and hand down the knowledge. So I wanted to go over this. This is us sitting here at the board. It's Mikey OCD hanging out with y'all, teaching you some stuff. And I will be back with more. What we will do next is we will go into the room and we will listen to the rig with a passive. And actually I'll have it crossed over for the lows. Okay, so the subs, I'll have the sub, which is a big sub. There will be an active that splits the sub, but then one whole frequency band will go here. It'll be 48 hertz and up will come to a passive. So everything from 48 up will be passively crossed over, and then we'll compare between something that has 48 and above all on a passive, or something that has 48 and above with an active and all the separate amplifiers amplifying their particular frequency. And we'll see, how is it? Which way is it better? So again, that is active biamping, triamping, quad amping, insane level tweakage on the audio rig, but it'll keep you busy for a while, years. So thanks for joining, and I'll see you.